In hostage negotiations, lessons learned from the United States and Israel. On April 26, 2019, President Trump shared with over 64 million of his Twitter followers the following quote from an unidentified senior official. Quote, "President Donald J. Trump is the greatest hostage negotiator that I know of in the history of the United States. 20 hostages, many in impossible circumstances, have been released in the last 2 years. No money paid." End of quote. This conviction may not be in complete consensus with everyone here this evening, but what is absolutely clear is the common value and great importance that the United States and Israel see in freeing hostages. We are extremely privileged to have two of the most experienced and capable hostage negotiators and patriots with us today to discuss the painstaking dilemmas of negotiating for the freedom of hostages held by ruthless enemies. From the United States of America, Ambassador Robert C. O'Brien, who is the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs. Ambassador O'Brien leads the U.S. government's diplomatic efforts on overseas hostage-related matters. He works closely with families of American hostages and advises the senior leadership of the U.S. government on hostage situations. Ambassador O'Brien also coordinates with the Interagency Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell and the development of implementation of U.S. hostage recovery policy and strategy. From Israel, our very own Colonel Reserve Lior Lotan, who is the former executive director here at ICT and currently serves here as a senior researcher. Lior was one of the foremost experts in hostage barricade situations and hostage negotiations. He commanded the IDF hostage negotiation team from 1998 to 2005. From 1993 to 1996, he commanded the IDF's Counter-Terrorism unit. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appointed Colonel Lotan as his special envoy for POWs and MIAs, a position he held until 2017. Ambassador O'Brien, first of all, thank you very much for being with us this evening. Can you please share with us what are America's key interests and what are the greatest dilemmas that you've faced when negotiating for the freedom of hostages?
Sure. I'll take that mic. This one's live. Well, thank you for the kind introduction, and it's great to be back here in Israel. This is my third visit over some 30 years, and it's amazing to see how Israel continues to progress and develop, and the amazing things that happen in this country. So it's great to be here, and it's great to be with the Colonel and with you, Doctor. Look, the biggest dilemma we've got over a couple dozen hostages and unjustly held Americans, folks held by rogue regimes or held by terrorist organizations, whether it be JNIM or AQAP or the Taliban. We generally aren't speaking on speaking terms with the folks that are holding our hostages. And so one of the dilemmas that we face is how do we obtain the release? Sure, sorry about that. One of the dilemmas we face is how do we enter into negotiations? How do we obtain the release of our hostages? And just very briefly, there are a couple of top-line points for us. First, recovering Americans who are wrongfully held abroad, whether by a terrorist organization, non-state actor, or a rogue regime, is an absolute top priority of the Trump administration. Since President Trump's been in office, we've had over 30 hostages or detainees return home safely to our shores without any ransoms being paid. And that's something that the President feels is a great accomplishment. The fact that he has put his prestige and the prestige of the United States behind this effort is something that's led to our success. Number two, we look at our first option when we have a hostage situation or wrongful detainee situation is to look at a military find, fix, and recover option. Our preference is not to negotiate with hostage takers. Our preference is to go get our fellow Americans back. And one of the great privileges of my job is to be able to work with our men and women in uniform who are ready literally at a moment's notice, a couple hours notice with our National Mission Force to go halfway across the world to find our hostages and bring them home. And what's amazing when you talk to those soldiers and sailors, airmen, they want that mission. They're, sir, find them and we're ready to go. Number three, we have to work with our partners. So whether it's in negotiating or communicating with the bad guys, we succeed when we're working closely with our allies and with our partners. And we've had, and we can talk about it later, we've had some tremendous success working with our allies to bring folks home, whether it's a diplomatic initiative or a military initiative, a kinetic option with our allies. And then the last thing we really focus on is how do we prevent these situations from taking place in the future? Because it's, at some point it has to stop. So that's a combination of no concessions, but it's also a combination of naming and shaming the hostage takers. I mean, we're in the 21st century. Hostage taking as a tool of diplomacy. It's an asymmetric tool of diplomacy, but it really should be consigned to the dustbin of history with piracy, with human trafficking, with ethnic cleansing, things that just aren't permitted and that civilized people do not engage in. And I think as we come together as an international community and let these wrongdoers, and it's fortunately a small group, they cause a lot of trouble, but to the extent we can isolate them, that we can name and shame them, the idea is to try and stop this terrible practice going forward, because the toll it takes on the families, on the hostages themselves, and on their friends is truly terrible. So, thank you.
Mr. Lotan, could you please share with us or explain to us what are the interests and considerations of the Israeli government on this matter, and what are the weights that are given to the different values when carrying out negotiations and making such decisions of actually conducting negotiations directly or indirectly with such organizations?
Okay, first of all, again, it's very good to be here in this conference every year, seeing the whole community of experts and officials. And the fact that you're dealing with this topic is more than appreciated. Thank you for that. And Ambassador, for coming and share with us the amazing and vast experience in this aspect. I remember we're speaking about value and interest. So in Israel, you know that we have a mandatory service, that for start. It's not a privilege. And this creates some kind of a contract between the military forces and the people and the servicemen and women, and of course the government. Part of this contract is that is not only a myth, but it is also a value that we will come and get you out from a trouble. We will come and get you out from our enemy. And this was also the practice policy during the decades of existence of the State of Israel, that Israel went, first of all, as American, to a tactical option if it was tangible and solid and serious enough. But if it's not, the issue is what is the responsibility if it is not? What is the other side of the coin? I remember that I was a squadron commander in a special unit that assault in an attempt of rescue an Israeli sergeant held by Hamas in 1994. We were failed. He lost his life during operation. One of the captains lost his life. Series of wounded, including myself. All terrorists were killed during this operation. But after it, late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin came to us, officers of this operation, trying to convince what was the reason for him, as a leader of a state, to send us to a mission with one hostages. His fate is the fate of the whole operation. And with a barricade situation, with a very heavy building in the area of Jerusalem and Ramallah. And he said, you know, if this is a tangible plan, and I believe in this plan and in the judgment of the leaders of the military service, so my first option is to go tactic. But if not, my responsibility to my nation is to do whatever it can, even and including paying a true concession to bring back my people from the hand of the enemy. And if I wouldn't send you to this operation, I would also lose my right and my legit excuse to go to a true concession bargain with terror organization to bring back my guys if there is no tactical option. So, in one hand, the commitment, the responsibility of the government, of the State of Israel, and the military forces to its citizens and servicemen is well known. The other side is what are the considerations. So it's not a standalone issue, because we are living in a neighborhood that there are also considerations. For example, we have 2 civilian and 2 KIA soldiers who killed during a military campaign in Gaza now, held by Hamas for almost 5 years, or practically 5 years. And this is one issue to solve between Israel and Hamas, but it's not standing alone, because the strategic consideration in Gaza, for example, stability in the region is also something to take under consideration. The acknowledgement, the direct negotiation with terror organization, which is not under the policy of the government of Israel, is all part of the paradigm to solve when we want to bring our civilians and servicemen back home.
Right, as you noted, Mr. Lotan and Ambassador O'Brien, as the people of Israel share common values with those of the American people. These values often make us vulnerable, but ultimately lead us often to victory. Such values include the sincere belief that a single human life is of vital interest to a nation as a whole, or as we're taught in the Talmud, he who saves the life of one man saves the entire world. This has been demonstrated, as Lior mentioned time and again. But when our leaders say, what do they actually mean when they say, we will do everything and anything to bring back the boys? And should a nation be able to say enough is enough and sacrifice a soldier or a civilian for a greater cause of the nation? What's your position on that, Ambassador?
Well, thanks. And look, I think you can see, just listening to Colonel Lotan's statement, kicking the door, getting shot himself, losing one of his comrades. We've got folks who are doing the same thing. Since I've been in office, I've watched a number of raids where our soldiers and sailors have gotten up in the middle of the night and within 4 or 5 hours been halfway across the world, or been flying halfway across the world within 3 or 4 hours, and then raiding compounds looking to save our folks. So I think that Israel and the United States are both willing to risk the lives and the blood of their sons and daughters to rescue hostages, but also national treasure to do so. And the way that we look at it is that we're not going to sacrifice folks. We're going to do everything we can to bring them home. And if for some reason we lose them while they're hostages, my mandate is to bring home their remains so that they can be buried with their family and their family plots, so that their family can have closure, and that they end up on our shores. So we're totally committed. We don't look to sacrifice folks, but there are important issues, geopolitical issues. So I try not to tell families that we're doing absolutely everything we can. I mean, for example, look, we've got hostages who are in Evin jail and Evin prison in downtown Tehran. Could we send in a couple of Ranger battalions and secure the neighborhood and send in one of our Sabre teams and breach the prison and get our folks out? We could do that. But there would be a tremendous cost that goes along with it. Establishing an air corridor, I mean, basically going to war with Iran. So that would fall under everything we can, and we're not doing that at this point. Although that is something we potentially could do. So what I like to tell families is we're going to do the best we can, and we're going to work as hard as we can, using all the tools that are available to us, all the tools that are in our that we can use without hurting our national interest to bring their loved one home. And look, one of those tools that we've used quite effectively, there was a great example with North Korea. If our adversaries show goodwill towards us, if they allow hostages to come home, as Kim Jong-un did, the president was extraordinarily grateful to him. And within I think 2 months of Otto coming home, and unfortunately and sadly, he did not survive. And his parents are great people, and they're working on on preserving his legacy. But we did have 3 other Americans who came home safely and are healthy. The president was willing to return the goodwill that was extended, and we ended up in a summit in Singapore not long thereafter, and the goal there is the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So what we're trying to show to our adversaries is that if you do make a goodwill gesture, if you do release an American hostage, although we're not going to pay money for it, and although we're not going to exchange prisoners we're not going to exchange terrorists for innocent civilians, we are willing to return the goodwill that's been extended to us, and so look, we're going to do our very best. Although I think it's a little unfair to tell families that we're going to do everything we can, because there are just certain options that are not available to us, during certain periods of time, including, invading another country.
Let's speak about facts. In the last 40 years, 20 Israeli servicemen held by terror or hybrid organization in Lebanon, in Gaza. The Palestinian organization at the beginning, then Hezbollah, and then Hamas. In the last 40 years, these 20 guys, 11 alive, and 9 bodies, 9 killed during action, returned to Israel only by an agreement with the organization. It means only by 11 different deals with this organization. It means that we never managed to establish the tactical option in these cases. It was different when they held our hostages in the area of Israel or West Bank or Judea and Samaria. But when they held outer the country, in Lebanon and Gaza, we forced to do a deal. In these deals, 11 transactions, we bring back our 11 alives and 9 KIA in exchange of about 450 bodies of our enemies returned to the enemy, about 1,700 prisoners, security prisoners. It's not the legal terms, but it's security prisoners who sentenced over a security operation against Israelis, and we return more than 4,600 detainees in Lebanon. So does that mean that Israel doing everything it can? I think so. Does that mean that when we will have the tactic option, we will go tactics? I'm sure so. And I hope it will be happen tonight. There's a good guys, men and women that work on that, and I hope we will break this paradigm and be able to bring us our guys with a blue and white flag solely. But I think that the value is there, the policy is there, the policy is there, but we are in a wrong path, in a manner that we are playing on the enemy area, on his ground, moral ground, and not in our ground. We've learned, if I have 2 or 3 minutes now, we've learned from Ord Wingett. Ord Wingett was a major general in the British military forces. He was stationed in Israel in 1936 as a young captain, intelligence officers, and he became so involved and so pro-Israelis, pro-Zionism, that after the Arab riots, he established a special unit. He called it the Long Night Squad, built based on British soldiers and Israeli soldiers, Israeli policemen in these times. And he brought the foundation of our special operation of the whole IDF. Go to the enemy line, bring the war to his ground, and fight him on his land as soon as you can. Of course, based on intelligence and night capability and all of that. And we're doing that also not only on the battlefield, which is very important, but we're doing that wrongly on the battlefield of POW and kidnapped and hostages. Because we went to the enemy line, we're speaking his term. He's speaking only about price of prisoners. He's speaking about security issue. He's speaking about this is a different topics than all other topics. He's speaking about I have time and I don't care about my guys that in your prison. So we need to change the paradigm to bring him, the enemy, to our line, our moral line. And by that, changing the equation and changing the paradigm. I think that the way to do it is with this component of the paradigm. First of all, we shouldn't speak about security issue, but a humanitarian issue. When it comes to soldiers, alive soldiers, this is a security issue. But when it comes to dead bodies and civilians, this is a humanitarian issue. It's not part of the armed conflict, for start. Second, we shouldn't go only to bilateral dimension, Israel-Hamas, because this is an end zone. We should open the table to other players, such as all the government that support humanitarian aid to the area of this hybrid organization. You went hybrid, you're not only military wing now, you're going to political, you are responsible for civilians, you ask for humanitarian aid, okay? So all those who provided this humanitarian are part of the discussion over the POW or over the abducted civilians. Thirdly, we should speak about the foundation, not the war, the law of war, but the humanitarian international law. Because if we will speak about that, and this is not my idea, this is Professor Irving Kotler, former Minister of Justice of Canadian Minister of Justice, who said, if you want to gain the benefit of the international humanitarian law, you need to obey the rationale, the value of this humanitarian law, and the responsibility of those who provide your humanitarian aid to make sure that you are following this logic. You cannot only gain the gain without even participating in the logic and philosophy of the humanitarian international law. So this is your responsibility of the government to support this hybrid organization, not to condition your support. Let's make no mistake, not to condition, but to factor in this element of releasing the prisoners and releasing the abducted civilians within your aid. So it's not only responsibility of Israel and the Hamas, but also the supporting government. And the last thing is that we shouldn't take the whole block of prisoners as one and say, listen, this is a binary case. Either we will release them all, including murderers, or not. And if not, we will suffer for another 5 years of fatigue warfare of the other side with us, because he's using this platform as a way to extend the battlefield to the time between wars, between military campaigns, to fatigue us and all of that. We should divide these prisoners, and this is a very sensitive issue. I know that most Israelis consider this whole block as one. We will never release them. But if we will cut them into the different groups, we might find some kind of tools, some kind of areas that we can deal with the other side without losing our interest, security interest concerning these terrorists. So I think if we will change the paradigm, open the window to another participants, to additional participants, based on the humanitarian law and not on the law of war, because that doesn't work with terror organization, and create a multi-actor arena, it might provide us more zone and freedom of maneuvers and maybe a solution in this time.
Thank you. A final question in light of what you've both shared with us, and based on all your experience of all these years that we've gained, do you think that peace-loving countries like the United States and Israel should negotiate with terrorist organizations, or has history showed us that such negotiations will just invite additional terrorism? And if that is the case, and we spoke about the Minister of Justice in Canada, would it make sense to legislate such an act that would prohibit politicians from negotiating with terrorism?
So just to make the U.S. policy clear, when it comes to terrorist organizations, we have a no concessions policy. We do not have a no negotiations policy. We'll talk to folks, and there are a lot of good reasons to talk to folks. A, you may be able to convince them that it's not in their interest to hold the hostages and to let them go, but there's also intelligence that can be gained. There are a lot of benefits from having those conversations. The logistics of actually talking to them can be difficult, and it may be that we're working through third parties, whether we're dealing with a rogue regime or a non-state actor. But I think there's always a benefit in talking. That's part of doing our best to bring our American citizens who are held captive or brought home. When it comes to concessions, that's a different issue. And we only encourage, and I think Professor Jenkins, I saw him earlier in the lobby, did a great study with RAND Corporation a few years ago that I encourage people to read. Paying concessions only encourages further kidnapping. It's very difficult to have conversations with families who have a loved one who's held by a terrorist organization that wants a ransom. And while we don't prosecute and have not prosecuted families or businesses that have paid ransoms either through KFR insurance or raised the money to pay it themselves, our government cannot pay ransoms. You take the Sahel, for example, where over the past 10 years, almost $100 million has gone to JNIM and affiliates, ISIS-GS. Those are capability-shifting ransoms. That buys a lot of Toyota Hilux trucks, a lot of 50 cals that can be mounted on the back of them. That increases the risk to American, French, German, allied soldiers who are operating in that region. But it's terrible for the citizens and the populace of those regions. So it just really isn't right, either for future Americans that will be taken because ransoms have been paid, or for the people, the soldiers in the first place, but also the innocent civilians of these countries where capability-shifting ransoms are paid and they're used to brutalize, the fruits of the ransoms are used to brutalize the citizens of these countries, often in very fragile states. So, look, I think negotiation is useful, and it can often lead, whether it's a direct negotiation or it's a negotiation through a third party. It can be very fruitful. As far as concessions, I think we have to be very careful as the community of civilized nations to cut off the payment to ransoms. And look, we know, we get reflections when some of these groups take Americans. The UK has also been very strong on this, or when they take Brits. We know that oftentimes the hostage takers are disappointed and wish they had taken someone from another country that's far more permissive in paying ransom. Because look, it's an expensive enterprise to move and feed and take care of and secure these hostages. And if you're not going to get a ransom, a $4, $5, $6 million ransom, which is what's been paid in the Sahel recently, if you're not going to receive that, it's not a great business deal. So I think that we've got to stay strong on no concessions, but I do think it's important that we always look for opportunities to talk to the captors and see if we can bring our folks home. And real quickly, I think whether it's Austin Tice in Syria or the Golden family here in Israel, Bob Levinson in Iran, we have and many others, Jeff Woodkey in Mali, we have a real duty to do what we can within the confines of our policy to try and bring these good people home. And so I'm always, as Churchill said, it's better to talk than to go to war, in a more colorful quote. Always willing to talk, but we have to draw the line at paying ransoms that will change the capabilities of these terrorist organizations, the rogue states.
I, of course, share and appreciate this American so strong policy. And I think our history demonstrates that we know that this is not the right thing to do. Your approach is the right thing to do, but we're trying to find the practical and applicable things based on the consequences. With that aspect, of course, negotiation for tactical issues, for intelligence and all of that, there is no dispute. Negotiation for true concession, we are in this path because of a serious reason. Most of them are this special contract between the government and the military force and its servicemen and women. Secondly, or thirdly, let's say that in our area, things will happen again in the future. So the issue is, and the question, and you ask it, should we have a set of rules or even legal consideration on restrictions to our negotiators? And this is a Shamgar committee in Israel arena. It brought after the deal with, to bring back, to repatriate Gilad Shalit from Hamas, which cost our state a very high and very unbearable price. I think this is the wrong way to do it. I think we need to maintain our flexibility. I think we don't need really a constraints to do it again. Of course, this is an issue of politicians. We need to be professionals. We need to adapt serious methodology, serious people that doing it very, very systematically, and finding every path to bring our guy back, and not to force them with some restrict legal or other administrative rules, because you know, when you get into a surgery, you want your surgeon to have everything you need, everything he can, based on our policy and based on our strategic needs and interests, to do the mission, and not restraining with anything else. So for me, this kind of a thinking is a demonstrative of weakness. And if you feel strong, and if you are strong, you don't need any restraints. You just need to do the job correctly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'd like to just wrap up this short session by thanking Ambassador O'Brien and Colonel Lotan for sharing with us their expert insight, and more importantly, for embracing this vital mission of bringing back the boys home. Thank you very much.